evening, folks. This is such a nice, long, generous introduction. And thank you very much, Sridhar. I'm really delighted and humbled to be here for two reasons. One is that such a wonderful welcome, warm welcome. I came from Europe, which you mentioned, but actually I also came from places like Sakinaka and Dadar, actually. It was more jet lag. And so thank you really for a very warm welcome. And secondly, actually to be among so many friends is a sort of a double joy, because I'm happy to note that there's so many friends here. So thank you for making this happen. Happy to climb the ghat all the way to Pune, but really, let me give you some good news at the beginning right away. And this is a lot of technical people, IIT types. The good news is that there is no PowerPoint. So we are just going to have a conversation. The second good news, or I don't know if you call it good news, is that the topic, Sridhar asked me that we're going to do this evening, it's going to be, among friends. So I was a little bit hesitant to impose such a serious sounding topic. Because, I was, otherwise we could have talked about the evolution of Pink Floyd. So the second good news, or if I will call it that, is that the topic is balancing economic growth and widening inequality. It's kind of too many big words. The good news is that we are not going to propose a solution here today. Or if anything, you are welcome to do it. But today is just an occasion to share some thoughts. And Sridhar has promised that we'll have a conversation. So we'll actually keep it interactive, informal, participative. So I really urge you, even the backbenchers, because we have a mic which can reach all the way there. So let's make it a evening to have some good conversation. It's light-hearted, but some of it is not. I mean, it's a serious topic as well. Since I wear a hat as an economist, I have some thoughts to share on this. But economics people think that they know everything, but the secret is that they don't. So one thing that I must say right away, that I never asked this question by the way, to Sridhar, that what does GS Labs stand for? What does GS mean? So some people started saying it's great software, but actually it is Gayatri and Shukla, right? So, did you guys get it? Anyway, that's a light-hearted thing. Okay, so here's the context. So economic growth. So I'm just going to make, even though there is no PowerPoint, but I'll make some points in the form of bullets. Not lethal, just so that we are in the age of 140 characters. So that is, it's not going to be, sometimes words may be big, but sentences will be so small. So let me just put before you some kind of facts or some observations. So thank you. So economic growth. People in India right now are somewhat dismayed or disheartened by the fact that economic growth is slowing down. But please remember one thing, that just 7 years ago, 2006, we crossed a very important landmark, of important Lakshman Rekha in our evolution as an economy. What was that? We became a $1 trillion economy. $1 trillion measured in dollars. This is rupees converted at the existing exchange rate into dollars. Not any fancy notion like purchasing power parity, because you know that in terms of purchasing power parity, the size of the Indian economy is the third largest in the world today. Between fourth and third, I think it's third largest. But that's only if you convert $1 not into 55 rupees, but you take into account the fact that $1 travels much farther in India. If you have $1 in your pocket, you that vada pav, you can probably get 2 dozen of them. But I bet you can't even get one equivalent vada pav or burger in the US. So that $1 is not the same purchasing power in the US as compared to India. So if you apply that to purchasing power correction factor, then you get a much bigger size of the economy. But I'm not talking about that. That's a somewhat artificial mathematical concept. We keep our brains in low second gear today. I'm just saying, take the rupee value, divide it by 55 or 54, whatever it is, that is the dollar value. In that simple calculation, our economy was $1 trillion in 2006. And today, in 2013, we are close to being a $2 trillion economy, 1.9 something. So, we have almost doubled. And we take pride in the fact that during those halcyon days, not too long ago, we were growing at 9%, the kind of growth that we used to hear about in China. So the dismay or somewhat, gloom and doom is because we are not growing at 9%. Hey, but if a $1 trillion economy grows at 9%, a $2 trillion economy only has to grow at 4.5%. This is simple math, first year brain. 9 divided by 2 is 4.5. But we are growing at 5%. Even the most pessimistic estimates of the current growth rate is actually 5%, not 4.5. So we are actually doing better. Everybody with me? So the growth is not all that bad. In fact, I think the growth is going to be around 6% next year. There is this calendar year 2013 going into 14 will be 6, probably 6.5. We'll see. So the fact is that the average growth rate in India over the last decade, 10 years, has been 8%. And the average growth rate for India in the last 15 years has been 7.5%. The growth rate for India has been positive for the last 32 years. We have never had a growth contraction since 1980. Okay, this is not to be taken lightly because there are so many countries in the world which actually went through a severe downturn. By downturn, when we say downturn in India, we simply say growth has come down from 9 to 4% or 5%. But when I'm talking about downturn in, say, South Korea in 1997, there was actually GDP contraction. The GDPs of Cyprus, Cyprus is a very tiny place, but Greece, let's say, is down 25%. The GDP of entire Europe during 2012 calendar year has actually shrunk by 1%. The GDP of the US just after 2009 was minus 5%. So we have never had a minus number since 1980 or 1981. So that is something to be remembered. So the growth, even though it's good that people are aspirational and more power to GS Labs and others like them, but please remember, in the context of a country or an economy with 1.2 billion people, this is an economy which has been expanding. Sometimes at 4%, sometimes at 9%, sometimes at 3. Not 3, we've never been 3. But basically, like for us, 5 or 4% is like a watermark, a low watermark. So that's the thing about economic growth. It is not enough, of course. You can say that this growth, just because it's, like they say, the classic thing is about, the classic thing is about the pessimist and the economist, pessimist and optimist. It's a Freudian slip. Pessimist and optimist, they say that the optimists say, isn't it great? India has never had a negative number. We're living in so many ups and downs and macroeconomic shocks and European crisis and this crisis, that crisis, and we still are growing at 5%. So the pessimist said, yeah, I'm afraid that's true. So without going into that debate, I agree that many people think that this growth is not enough. We need to aspire to higher growth. But I submit to you the first bullet point is that India cannot afford to grow at a kind of a scorching pace, shall I call it, like China. What China is supposed to have grown, because a lot of people are somewhat skeptical about Chinese data, but let's say they are supposed to have grown at almost 10% for 30 years, since the days of Deng Xiaoping when he took over, since 1978, 79. Chinese economy grew at 10% per annum. So I submit to you, this is kind of watering down the dog. It's too waterful. I'm not going to speak that long. So China is supposed to have grown at 10%. So compared to 10, this 5 sounds good. But I submit to you first bullet point is that if you grow beyond a certain threshold point, which we can debate and I cannot define it accurately, there will be this phenomenon of unbalanced growth. So what will happen is that there will be some people, when you have a growth rate of 5 or 10, 8% for the entire economy, that's an average for the whole country. That includes Assam, that includes Ladakh, that includes Andaman, that includes Kerala, that includes Rajasthan, Orissa. This is the average for the whole country. So already this 8 or 7% includes some parts of the country which are growing at perhaps 10%, 12%. Some parts which are barely crawling at 2 or 3%. This is an average for the country. It's not like each and every person, each and every region of the country is going at the same pace. That cannot happen, obviously. So I'm submitting to you the first point is that if you grow a little faster, average growth, that is going to create imbalance in the country, and imbalance beyond a certain point is dangerous for us. So that's first point. You can ask me why, but this is the first point. So what is that optimum growth rate? I don't know, but I can take a guess. That will probably be around 7.5%. I think structurally 7.5 to 8% is what we can reasonably aspire, which will be something that we can be sure that it is not so imbalanced as to create stresses in the system, and it's not so low that that growth cannot have impact on people's standard of living. So 7.5 to 8%, and if you are going at, as I said, this year is 5, but it's going up to 6.2 next year. So we're kind of creeping back to that long-term, what I think is balanced and sustainable long-term, medium-term, long-term growth for India. Okay. Incidentally, the growth of China, as I said, they say that the Chinese economy grew at 10% for 30 years. That's a huge, Indian size of the Indian economy, I told you there's not a single negative number. Same thing is true for China. From early 1990s to today, we are 4x. Today we are 4x. So we are 4 times as big. China is more than 6 or 7 times as big. So phenomenal growth. Today we are in dollar terms 2 trillion, I said. China is already at about 6 trillion, $6.5 trillion dollars, just dollar terms. And if you take PPP, purchasing power parity, the same kind of discussion we had, description we had about the dollar traveling farther, even bigger. But guess what? So the Chinese economy grew at 10%, scorching pace for Indian standards. Do you know what is the rate of growth of the real wage of an average worker in the industrial sector? Real wage means wage adjusted for inflation. So I know this is year ending and this is increment time and all that, so I don't want to start. The senior management in GSL may not, but anyway, this is about China. So, did you know what is the growth rate in this 30-year period? What is the average growth rate of wages for Chinese workers? What is the guess? 3? The economy was growing at 10%, in real terms, by the way. This is inflation adjusted terms. So 10% more steel, 10% more cars, so every year, compounded, 6x times. Sorry?
1.5%.
1.5.
More than 10%.
Sorry?
More than 10%.
More than 10%. Answer is 0. Close to 0. So real wages in China, except for the last few years, actually stagnated completely. So because of that, the share of consumer spending as a share of GDP, you can break up GDP by end use by saying industrial sector, services sector, and agriculture. That's one way. That's called from the production end. But you can also break up GDP from the end use side, which is consumer spending and the rest. So consumer spending as a proportion of GDP in China went down from 55% to today 32%. Less than 1/3 of Chinese, the giant GDP of China, is accounted for by consumer spending. It's no surprise because the wages, who are going to be the consumers? Largely industrial workers, right? Of course, the rural side also, but their wages are not rising. So who was getting benefit? Of course, this is not an India-China talk, but please permit me. India plus China is about 37% of the world, so we're talking about the world. So who was getting benefit of this fantastic China growth? The benefit was going entirely to the corporate sector. So labor and capital. Labor and capital are two inputs into the production process. The classic economic theory. I have an English professor of ours here, but we also, the HSS department, that is Humanities and Social Sciences, also had economics. So that was the first time we got exposed to economics. But I must say that the attendance was not compulsory. So we took some liberties with that. This Chinese growth, as I was saying, that labor and capital is the classical way of looking at an economic model. So you input labor, there are two major inputs to production, labor and capital, you get output. That's GDP. So the gains of all this growth were not accruing to labor as much as capital. So the corporate sector had a fantastic run. Of course, but you know that the corporate sector in China is largely owned by the public sector, meaning it is largely government owned. So the corporate sector profits or the surplus was just, coming out of its ears, their treasuries were overflowing, and that entire profit or accumulated profit was replowed or reinvested in what is called infrastructure and investment. So those of you who've been to China know what impressive the infrastructure looks like. It's highways or roads and bridges and airport, but it's all a consequence of the fantastic GDP growth whose gains were mainly expropriated, if I can use that word, by the corporate sector, which is de facto the public sector, and it was completely an investment-led growth. So everything was plowed back as investments. Some people say 12-lane highways, maybe not so many cars. Classic example I like to give is that whenever you go to Shanghai airport, Pudong, there are two airports, there's this maglev train which travels at 500 kilometers per hour from the airport to actually not Shanghai city downtown, but actually the outskirts. So it travels in like 4 minutes, or 3 minutes, or 6 minutes distance of 36 kilometers. But occupancy of that is barely 5%. At any point, the train is 95% empty or 90%. Because so for various reasons, because the train fare is not so cheap. But this is a consequence of the investment spending. So it's an investment machine. The Chinese economy is an investment machine. Even today in 2013, when the Chinese economy is slowing down and their growth rate has come down to 7%, the investment ratio is still 50% of GDP. The comparable number for India is about 35%. Okay. The investment is required because GDP cannot grow unless you invest. Think of a very simple model, which is a farm. A farmer has, let's say, one crop, which is corn. So you produce 1,000 bushels of corn every year. You have to set aside some little portion, which is plowed back, which is used as seed for next year. So if you don't set aside that little, say 10%, you won't have any corn to sow next year. So next year, if you want to have again corn production, every year you have to set aside certain portion. That is called investment spending. So a GDP is national income. You have to set aside certain part of the national income to sow next year, so that it becomes GDP for next year. The more you sow, the more the output will grow. So therefore, the higher the investment ratio, but higher the GDP next year. But of course, there's a optimum ratio, because otherwise you're wasting. You're wasting capital. You're wasting by doing too much over investment. You're wasting. I just told you this Pudong story of 95%. So some people may say that's a big debate. That is it. You got to first build the stadium, and then the people will come and fill up the stadium, or you first wait till, like in India, everything is stretching at the seams, and then you start thinking about infrastructure. But that's So the number for India, coming back to India. So the Chinese number is consumer spending has dropped from 55% to 32%. In India, that number is 70%, even today, 68, 69. So consumer spending as a proportion of our GDP, which is $2 trillion, is more than 2/3. And so the investment spending is about 30, 35. So it adds up to more than 100. So we have a negative balance. That's why we have a current account deficit. But this is not an economics lecture. So my first bullet was that growth in India actually is pretty healthy. The second bullet is summary of this discussion is that if you don't, today what has happened in China is that ever since the new administration took over, they have a new president, a new premier, and a new Politburo. I mean, a lot of the members are new. Their main mantra is now inclusive growth. That is, they are now consciously in the next 5-year plan and even beyond, China is now focusing on how to balance this. They have gone from 55 to 32. They want to now reorient the entire economic strategy to not just build infrastructure, but to actually increase consumer spending. And because they have realized that unless workers' wages rise, unless people's purchasing power rises, we are going to be stuck with serious problems. So similarly in India, the inclusive growth mantra came much earlier. I mean, I think it's at least 10 years old now. And why is that? So that's the third point. Why do we care about inclusive growth? Why do we care about this rebalance? In China, the Chinese word for it, the English translation of the Chinese word is that they call it harmonious growth. In fact, it was introduced by the previous regime, Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao. They actually already were transiting into what they call harmonious growth, which we in India call inclusive growth. And this is a trend we are seeing globally. You saw the 1% movement in the one Occupy Wall Street, the 1%ers versus 99%ers. So this is actually beginning to sound like a global movement. The need to now rebalance growth towards decreasing inequalities. So one consequence of growth has been that inequality has widened. I gave you the example of 55 to 32. If you can think of that as inequality. By the way, let me make a distinction between inequality and poverty. So these are two different things. I hope it's very clear to you. Poverty definition is in terms of absolute number. That is, below the poverty line is if you don't have enough food, if you don't have enough calories. That's more or less a universal definition. Of course, you also have relative poverty. So somebody who is considered poor in an American society may actually be above the poverty line in India. But by and large, we understand what poverty means. Inequality, on the other hand, is simply a ratio of the richest person into the poorest person. It could be that the poorest person in a particular economy or society may be, in fact, classified as a rich middle class person in India. You could still have, this is theoretically possible that you could still have a relatively well-off society, richer society than India, but having higher income inequality than in India, right? So inequality and poverty are two different things. We are not going to so much discuss poverty today because I think that is, there is hardly any debate that what should be done about poverty. I'm going to actually talk about inequality. So what has happened is that in many countries, including India, the consequence of economic growth has led, one of the consequences has been widening inequality. Now, is it surprising to you? Does it cause any surprise that inequality should have become worse? Is it a natural consequence, do you think? Or this is something...
Actually, I think it's a sort of professional deformation of economists.
No, I just want to know
Talk
whether...
about growth, but not to talk about the growth to the extent to which affected by inflation, inflationary pressure. So the real growth is there.
I'm just asking this question, just a yes or no thing, that if a country is growing, if you have economic growth, is it natural for this audience, at least here, that of course inequality is going to get worse? Because many people think that, and this is supported by economic theory. For example, if the growth is going to be in Mumbai city real estate construction, suppose interest rates are low, and think about 2001, 2002. Real estate sector is booming. They desperately need construction workers. Bollywood is booming. They need some, what do they call stuntmen or sport boys. The financial sector is booming, and so they need back office data entry and couriers. Courier boys is huge demand. There's so much balloon. So everybody is coming to Mumbai. So wherever they're coming from, that area is going to have low economic growth. So if I measure the income inequality not among people of the country but among regions, so if they are coming from, let's say, Jharkhand, it's a very just a small aside for a minute, that while the real estate construction boom happens in cities like Mumbai or Pune, what do we need for real estate? We need cement. Where does cement come from? Limestone. We need steel. Where does steel come from? Iron ore. We need, to produce cement you need power. Where does power come from? Coal. And guess where does the coal and the limestone and the iron ore come from? It comes from Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh. But when people from those areas come, you don't want the people. You just want your limestone and you just want, that's near. Nobody from any particular political party. So there's so much about. So I'm just saying that the consequence of growth is inequality. If you just measure inequality in terms of regional incomes, this migration will automatically, if you measure income now, then you take, you go as a statistician measure, you will find a boom in income in Mumbai, and you will have possibly a temporary depression in income in Jharkhand. But of course, you might have some remittance income going back. So remittance, but even if you net it out, so it is quite natural to assume that growth will lead to some inequality, especially regional inequality. What has happened is that, now this is, I don't know, bullet point number 3, that actually inequality has become worse in all possible dimensions. It is not only regional inequality.
Sorry, can I just interject here? I would imagine that if you had more cement, I'm just taking your example.
Because Mumbai does not produce a single gram of cement.
No, so you have more cement, more steel, more whatever from coal from Jharkhand being mined. So I would imagine that would lead to higher employment in that area too. Why are we saying that it is see, the inequality
Seems to be more because there's a sort of crony capitalism that is more the cause than.
This is not, we are not getting into some MNS type of issue.
No.
By the way, the mining is done by very large earth moving equipment, by Komatsu and all. The amount of labor you need for construction is not tenfold or hundredfold.
Definitely.
So therefore, of course, there is local employment, no doubt about that. But the employment potential of services sector like construction, and in fact all the other services like courier is much more.
No, I don't disagree with that. All I'm saying is that these are people from Jharkhand who have come here and have got employed. So, though the growth is in Bombay, finally these people remit their money back to.
No, I said exactly. I said that, but I'm just saying that I'm just supporting the popular view here that it is quite natural to expect that when you have growth, and especially unbalanced and rapid growth, there will be some areas of the country which will have a temporary depression, or perhaps they will grow. So Mumbai will grow at 14%, and Jharkhand and Southern Bihar will grow at 3 or 4%. That will show up as more inequality. So everybody is growing. Please remember, when I say therefore we are not talking about poverty per se, because we don't have time to go into that. Even the poorest of the poor in India compared to 1990 are much better off. Even people who went into interiors will see that you rarely see people without wearing chappals, some footwear. You rarely see people who are naked. At least, people have some clothes. So we have come a long way, but therefore I'm saying the absolute incomes of even the poorest of the poor have risen. But it is possible that the poor sections of society, their income has risen 10%, whereas the higher sections have risen by 50% or 60%. But I have got this bullet number 3 news for you, that unfortunately what has happened is that inequality has gotten worse in every possible dimension. Regional inequality, worse. Income inequality, worse. Wealth inequality, worse. So if you measure in mathematics or statistics, there is a way to measure this. It's called the Gini coefficient. We have a great statistician sitting there. So I don't know if I should give you the formula. It's just a number, index number, which computes an inequality, call it a coefficient. It's a number between 0 to 1. If the number is 0.9 or 0.99, it means highly unequal society. Right, Mukul? And if it is close to 0, then it's a highly equal society. So the India number is roughly 0.35 today, income inequality. Wealth inequality is worse. So our number today is getting worse and worse. Of course, we can take some solace in the fact that our number is better than Brazil, than South Africa and China. So
How much is US?
US, oh, Europe's here, okay. US is about, is less unequal than India. So maybe 0.32. So it's not much better, but it's in that range. But Brazil is 0.4, Brazil, South Africa, China, they are much worse. So we might take solace in that. But compared to our own record, it has gotten worse. But what is more worrying is that, as I said, wealth inequality. Because income inequality in India, we do not measure income because there is no. You might have your UIDs, your software whiz kids, but we still don't know how much income you make. No reference to Swiss banks. It's just that we do not have a mechanism to measure people's incomes. Only 3% of India, 1.2 billion people, 3% people file income tax. Half of our parliamentarians don't file income tax. So 16% of national income is constitutionally protected from paying income tax. What is that called? Agriculture income. So we don't have record of people's income. And even the 3% who file their taxes, I know Mr. Bhagwat is here, so he will. But we are not sure that that's a total story. So the only way, when I'm saying that income inequality is getting worse, the only way to say that is by a proxy. How do we do it? We do it indirectly. We go and observe people's consumption expenditure, spending patterns. How many surf excel, how many cell phones, or how many dal and how much chawal, rice. So this is called consumption spending. So we have a very 100-year-old tradition of very detailed statistical samples of measuring people's spending, consumer spending. Now, out of income, people, spending is not the whole of income. So already, if you're going to measure consumer spending inequality, it is a very weak proxy for income. If anything, the income is much worse unequal because different people spend different portions of their income on consumer spending. For example, typically poor people will end up spending 90 to 99% of their income on their day-to-day consumption. Rich people may spend only 25%. So even that limited and somewhat weak and unrepresentative way of measuring income inequality, which is in the form of consumer spending, is showing that the Gini coefficient is getting worse. That's only as far as income is concerned. But when it comes to wealth, we are even worse. Incidentally, for income, the most equal societies, of course, are the usual culprits is Norway, Sweden, Denmark, but also countries like Canada and Australia. Why is it that the rich countries always get this equal, equality, and why is there no Bangladesh? Well, we have something to say about that. Anyway, I'll not take so much time, but basically maybe that gives you a clue towards what is the concluding punchline. That it is no coincidence that these Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Australia, Canada are the ones which have much better quality of equality. It's not a coincidence that they just happen to be rich. But coming back to income inequality, so the wealth inequality is even worse. Wealth inequality is even worse. What is wealth inequality? What wealth do you have? You have land, car, flat. That's what we think, right? But the real wealth, remember, especially to an audience like this, is what is called your human capital. What is human capital? Is the sum cumulative impact of your education. I bet, and Sridhar, you can corroborate this, that 25, 30 years ago, if somebody asked you what's the best investment to make, or whether I should invest in a flat in Dadar or in Gulaba, or where should I put this money, I bet the investment in your education has given the most fantastic return, wildly better than any stock market in the world or any investment, gold or whatever, right? So the best investment is human capital. Now, if you include human capital as a notion of wealth, I'm saying wealth inequality in India is much worse because it's not only landholding, and landholding is highly asymmetric. The large landlords own perhaps 50-60% of the total landholding. But forget about land because I'm talking about a big chunk of wealth is in your human capital. And when you factor in the wealth effect of human capital, and then you put in issues like access to education, good quality education, the kind of education which can multiply your income has gone up probably 100 or 1000x because of your education investment in human capital. Then the wealth inequality is very, very bad. And then India starts, then China, on this front at least China has done very good. Because what happens is that once your human capital is low, then this inequality actually is persistent. It has a hysteresis. It will actually persist from generation to generation. So if poor kids whose parents are poor and who have no access to education, their parents didn't have any access to education, they will continue to live in relatively lower wealth and lower income. On top of it, if they live in some part of the city or places which are highly polluted, so their brains will have some lead residue, so they will not perform well in competitive exams. So even the poorest, once in a while you get this Jopadiwala will be a CA topper, JEE topper, but most of these kids will not even have a chance at cracking JEE. We were discussing JEE in the car, so I thought. So this whole thing about JEE being the gateway to have equal access, equal opportunity to really break out. No sir, because we are now building in these disadvantages. So if you factor all this in, then the wealth inequality is very, it's getting worse and worse. And then of course on wealth inequality you add all the other things, equality of access, because all these other societies, they give a lot of importance to, all societies believe that their citizens should be fundamentally treated as equal and with equal respect. But we know that that doesn't happen, and increasingly it is not. It is getting worse. So how do we? So if you agree that this situation is serious enough and something needs to be done, that's my job for the day, because we are not going to discuss solutions here. In fact, I just want to have two quotes. I want to mention two quotes here. One is by Mr. Narayan Murthy. Of course, Infosys, this is not about Infosys, it's about Narayan Murthy. In fact, the great Infosys was born in this city, so we should be proud of that. So he was asked, what is your vision for Infosys? What is the vision for your company? He was the chairman that time. He said, I want Infosys to be the most respected company. I don't know if you remember this quote. So he didn't say I want it to be the biggest, highest in turnover or the biggest in market cap. He said I want to be the most respected company. So that shows, I think this quote is a very telling quote, that actually this desire for respect, desire to be treated, and also how in society really we want everybody to have at least the same respect. And if you use that just somewhat abstract dimension, then now start thinking about inequality in Indian society. So here is the aspiration of one of the India's iconic leaders, business leaders, and now juxtapose that with what is the reality in terms of inequality measured in terms of respect inequality, just Gini coefficient for respect. But I also want to bring here another quote, another IT person, but it is somewhat out of context, but I just want to juxtapose it. Mr. Vinod Khosla. You heard of Vinod Khosla? Who also is a Pune child, I believe. He has a house in Pune. So he is a very famous venture capitalist, as you know. And I had an occasion to meet him many, many years ago, and he was already a very famous venture capitalist then. So we were kind of asking him about what does he do with his time, and we were all very impressed and somewhat surprised to learn that he said, most of the time I'm just doing recruiting. I'm just meeting potential people that I want to recruit. 95% of the time I'm just recruiting. So it's not like looking at business ideas and business plans, I'm just recruiting. But he also said, and this was in the context of India's so-called socialist democracy, that, sometimes these people have this tendency. I mean, I was going to say NRI, but I didn't say it. So he was giving advice to the Indian government, saying, you guys, this is too high taxation, and also his advice was, I understand the problems of inequality and poverty and all, but really what you need to do is unleash the power of the entrepreneur. There are all these people raring to go with great creative ideas, and especially somebody coming from the IT field and innovation field would say that. But what he meant is that you guys should let the winners take off. Don't chain them or constrain them with any of your crazy laws and tax regulations and TDS laws and repatriation constraints. Unleash the energy and then tax the hell out of them. So this, I think, to me, typically it's a quote. I didn't take his permission because it was a private conversation, but I think it was many years ago, so the statute of limitation is over, it can't be sued. So this is a typical American attitude, right? Let me call it that. That we need to unleash creative energies. And if you want to do something for society and equality and inequality, whatever, just tax the hell out of them. But that does not work, sir. Mr. Khosla, it does not work. You need to build in design of social and economic policy things which not only constrain the worsening of inequality, not only curb it, but actually promote equality. Promote equality. And that is sort of last few minutes I think I've spent on that. The reason you need to do that, there are several reasons. Number one is political reason. See, as I said, we are a society which is supposed to be everybody's equal, at least respect. We treat everybody as equal politically. Okay? So we already have this problem that people with money. So this is a talk which has these four intermingling concepts: democracy, capitalism, inequality, and what's the democracy, capitalism, inequality, and something. I'm missing something. These four things are okay, growth. There's something else, but I forget. So these four concepts are intermingling in this discussion. So we as a democracy, we are supposed to be politically equal, all of us. It's not just one person, one vote, but each one of us has a say on how our society will be run. Now, this is not a debate about democracy, by the way. So we are in a democracy, and that's a non-negotiable. But we are finding that in a capitalist framework, people with money, whoever has bigger shares, deeper pocket, has a greater say. So we kind of try to balance the two. But if we want to believe that politically we are equal, then we need to do something about money power in politics. Because we believe fundamentally that our democracy works with giving equal access or equal say, equal voice to every citizen and voter. Then why is it that some people with money are getting more say? So political reason why inequality must be curbed is because politically we are a society which believes in political equality. That's reason number one. Second, reason number two is that if we are not politically cohesive, then we will never be able to act together to change society for the better. How do we change society for the better? By voting in elections, by making our representatives accountable, by asking questions. Jawab do mujhe, the right to ask information, the right to question your leaders. This thing will not happen if you are not somewhat cohesive. Those of you who live in cooperative housing societies know how uncooperative they can be. So if it can happen in the microcosm of a housing society, so cohesion is required. That's reason number two. So first of all, politics cannot be allowed to be contaminated with money power skewing the thing about inequality. Secondly, cohesion. Thirdly, we need, and this is the economic argument. Why do we need less inequality in society? Because inequality is like pollution. Inequality is like pollution, or inequality is like a traffic jam. It affects everybody. You will find that in Haji Ali in Mumbai, now people just, all the windows, everybody is in air-conditioned cars with slight tint, so complete tint is not allowed black, but there are people knocking on your windows already. Okay, they are trying to sell you a rose or a book or just asking for money. If it gets any worse, you will now have to keep kind of some ammunition inside. If they come with a stone, you might have to be anxious. At least in Mumbai probably people, but in some other parts of India perhaps they are already feeling anxious. Maybe not only knock on your window, but he might break the window. So this is the economic argument that if inequality, the capitalistic, so the process or the market process produces incomes, there is an income distribution, and that distribution can be measured with the Gini coefficient. That can be called unequal or more equal. But that distribution, again a statistical concept, which is the distribution, that affects everybody the same way. It's like the weather or like pollution. So some factories are emitting smoke, some are not, some are clean, but the combined particulate matter is sitting on everybody. So inequality is like a public good, if I can use another jargon word, which affects everybody. And just like pollution, we can't have zero pollution. I mean, we are in an industrial age, we can't have zero pollution, but we can have something called too much pollution. Do you agree? That we may not be able to define it accurately, but we can have a reasonable consensus in society. This is too much pollution, so we should have start constraints on this. So same thing with inequality. We cannot have zero inequality. We cannot have complete equality in society. No way. But there is such a thing called too much inequality. And the economic argument is that if you let it become worse, it will be like pollution, only worse. At least pollution, say you can wear an oxygen mask or something. There will be no oxygen mask against inequality. That's the economic argument. And then there is social argument. I told you about those kids growing up with lead in their blood streams. So if this equal access, political equality also means you should have reasonably equal starting points, equality of opportunity equality. But that also means equality of opportunity is an abstract concept. If you are, paid agar khali hai, you're on an empty stomach, what is the equality of opportunity? So you need to at least ensure that some basic nutrition and nourishment, so everybody has a starting point. So that's the social arguments why we should have. So we are finding that in India, I told you, income inequality getting worse, wealth inequality getting worse, regional inequality getting worse. But if you measure even things like very specific things like consumption of pulses, tur dal, mung dal, proteins, that intake is also getting worse. Inequality in that. That is actually measured by the National Sample Service, by a Family Health Service. So we have data on this. So that is the social reason, that these things need to be, these are the reasons why inequality has picked up. So, in conclusion, I mean, now we are in the last few minutes, that, as I said, it's not meant to be, tomorrow is done and it's almost the weekend here, so we're not going to be so grim about it, but at least intellectually, if we can subscribe to this notion. Incidentally, if those of you who think that we are heavily taxed, and I know that those of you who are in SEZs don't get taxed at all, India's tax to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the world. India's total tax collection divided by national income is only 11%. Only 3%, yeah, you just know that. 3%, no, but I think 3% pay income tax. But if I add all taxes, excise, customs, service tax, TD, whatever, if you add up all taxes and divide the national income, that number is only 11%. For America, 30, I mean, most of these countries, it's 55, 60%. So what are we talking about being, of course, again, this is not a discussion about tax policy. So, I would like...
So what about this counter view that a country which is so poorly governed like us needs to have this tax to GDP ratio only?
No, we'll come to that. Let me just conclude, say a few things, and in fact, we want to have, I don't know, Sridhar, we have time for a few Q&A. Yes. So let me just conclude by saying the following, that the road to reducing inequality, of course, there will be multiple things. There will be things like taxation. There will be things like having more equitable taxation. Do you agree that two people getting the same income should roughly pay the same amount of tax? That's called horizontal equity. But guess what? If somebody is earning purely dividend income, like Mr. Narayan Murthy or Mr. Nandan Nilekani, I can use their name because they want to sue me. And somebody else is earning much, dividend income is tax-free in India. So if your income, yeah, the company is paying taxes and distribution tax, etc. We'll discuss that. But even then, I can make this case. So we have a long way to go to achieve horizontal equity, vertical equity in taxation. But taxation is only one way of ensuring lesser inequality. There are positive ways as well. It's not only coercive taxation. There are things like, and this is what the approach we seem to have taken. I'm not neither endorsing nor rejecting or criticizing it, because today is not the time to do it. But one person goes to the ration shop to buy his or her rice or whatever or kerosene. The shopkeeper says, "Nahi aaya, khatam ho gaya." You stand in line for 5 hours. He says, "No, sorry, we run out of," and there is no punitive action against this. With this new right, now you can take the guy to court or to do a police complaint. So there is a very big qualitative difference between right to food, the law which is coming. As I said, this is not a platform to endorse or reject, but this is the spirit of. So what we have done is we have developed this rights-based paradigm to supplement various tax methods or transfer payment methods. Right to food, right to information, right to education, right to work. Right to work is of course only in rural areas. We call it the National Rural Employment Guarantee. All of these are very imperfect. There are a lot of holes, but this is the conceptual next forward step we have taken. And in that, we are not anyway out of sync with the rest of the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to at least be sensitized to this on this Thursday evening, that there is something to be said about too much inequality, and we need to temper that to maintain the sustainability of our growth, which I think is pretty okay. I want to conclude with a quote. I want to conclude with this quote. So I'm reading the quote. How long shall we continue to this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which we have so laboriously built up. This quote is from 1949, November. Mr. B.R. Ambedkar. So on that note, I shall conclude. Thank you. Time for some Q&A. I don't want to get into your
No, no, we have plenty of time, Ajit. Thank you so much. We have mics going around.
Hi Ajit, I enjoyed your talk very much. Sort of a comment and a question.